Book review, Last Resort. Gripping return for Joe Dillard by Scott Pratt and J.D. Pratt. Last Resort marks welcome and suspenseful return for one of legal thriller fiction's most beloved characters. Joe Dillard, co-authored by J.D. Pratt, the son of the late Scott Pratt, the novel skillfully carries forward the voice and legacy of series that has captivated readers with its gripping plots, moral complexity, and deeply human protagonist. Installment, the Dillard saga not only continues but evolves, tackling themes of corruption, legacy, and justice in a world still very much in need of principled fighters like Joe. Plot summary, Last Resort. Gripping return for Joe Dillard plunges readers back into the tumultuous world of the former defense attorney turned reluctant investigator. Set against the backdrop of rural Tennessee, the story delivers fast-paced and emotionally charged mystery that tests Joe Dillard's resilience, integrity, and capacity for justice. Joe Dillard has spent years trying to leave his old life behind. After surviving courtroom battles and personal tragedies, he now lives quietly with his wife, Caroline, seeking solace in slower pace and simpler existence. But peace proves short-lived when high-powered Nashville attorney Jack Gamble goes missing while vacationing near the Appalachian Trail. Gamble's wife turns to Joe for help. She insists that local law enforcement isn't taking the disappearance seriously, and she's convinced something sinister has happened. Initially reluctant to get involved, Joe agrees to investigate. Compelled by his sense of justice and lingering instincts he thought he had buried for good, his decision quickly draws him into a web of secrets tied to a small, isolated town where corruption runs deep and justice is hard to find. As he begins to dig into Gamble's last known movements, Joe discovers that the attorney was on the verge of exposing criminal enterprise involving powerful figures, people willing to kill to protect their interests. What begins as missing person case soon becomes dangerous hunt for the truth. Joe uncovers trail that leads him to remote, seemingly idyllic lakeside resort with dark reputation. The locals are tight-lipped, the sheriff is evasive, and the resort's owners harbor secrets buried beneath layers of southern charm and hospitality. The more Joe probes, the clearer it becomes that Gamble's disappearance was no accident. Throughout the investigation, Joe is forced to confront his own demons. Caroline's health is fragile, and each step deeper into the case threatens the quiet life they've fought so hard to build. But as the pieces come together, Joe realizes the cost of turning away could be higher than he imagined, not just for Gamble's family, but for others who may also be in danger. Aided by few trusted allies, including former colleagues and determined local journalists, Joe unravels conspiracy that stretches from backwoods resort to high-powered legal and business elites. At the heart of it all lies cold-blooded scheme involving fraud, land theft, and murder, masked by sudden civility and enforced with ruthless precision. Tension mounts as Joe closes in on the truth, risking everything to expose the players behind the facade. When the key witness is found dead and Joe becomes the target himself, he must rely on his wits and years of legal and investigative experience to stay ahead of those who would silence him. In a gripping climax that pits Joe against a killer hiding in plain sight, justice is served. But not without personal costs. A Last Resort is more than a legal thriller. It's a story about loyalty, redemption, and the enduring fight for justice in a world where doing the right thing is often the most dangerous choice. J.D. Pratt, collaborating seamlessly with his late father Scott Pratt's legacy, preserves Joe Dillard's voice with authenticity and heart. Novel captures the moral complexity and southern grit that fans have come to love while ushering Joe into new territory that's both thrilling and emotionally resonant. In his return, Joe Dillard reminds readers why he remains one of the most compelling figures in legal fiction. Flawed, principled, and unafraid to take on the worst of humanity in pursuit of what's right. Last Resort stands as gripping continuation of his story, blending suspense, legal drama, and heart-stopping action into deeply satisfying plot and structure. At its core, Last Resort is tightly plotted mystery that begins with familiar hook. High-powered Nashville attorney Jack Gamble vanishes while vacationing in the Tennessee mountains. When local authorities offer little help and even less transparency, Gamble's wife enlists Joe Dillard to investigate. What appears to be straightforward missing persons case soon spirals into much darker narrative of power, greed, and violence. The pacing is expert, deliberate yet never sluggish. The author is deftly alternate between quieter introspective scenes and moments of high-stakes suspense. Every discovery made by Joe peels back another layer of deceit, leading him towards a secluded lakeside resort that is anything but the tranquil haven it pretends to be. As he digs deeper, the reader is drawn into a web of corruption that implicates local law enforcement, business magnates, and political influencers. What sets Last Resort apart from many procedural thrillers is its ability to maintain narrative momentum while still allowing space for emotional and philosophical reflection. The story doesn't rely on twist for twist's sake. Rather, it builds tension with escalating stakes and personal risk, culminating in satisfying and thematically rich conclusion. Characterization and Joe Dillard's evolution. Joe Dillard remains the anchor of the series, and in this installment he is as compelling as ever. Wiser, wearier, and more reflective, readers familiar with his journey will appreciate the nuances of his character, the moral clarity that guides him, the fierce love he has for his wife Caroline, and the lingering shadows of his past. What's particularly striking in Last Resort is how Joe is forced to reconcile the man he used to be with the man he has become. No longer the courtroom warrior or hot-headed investigator, Joe's approach now is more measured and perhaps more vulnerable. His wife's health remains a silent thread throughout the narrative, adding an emotional dimension that colors every decision he makes. This personal stake grounds the novel and deepens our investment in his choices. Supporting characters are equally well drawn. Caroline's quiet strength serves as both counterbalance and motivator for Joe's actions. The local journalist who aids Joe adds fresh dynamic, highlighting the importance of truth-telling across different platforms. And the villains, without falling into caricature, are believably menacing, their motivations grounded in greed and entitlement rather than overt evil. J.D. Pratt has done an exceptional job capturing the essence of the characters his father created, adding his own voice without jarring the continuity or tone. There's clear respect for Joe's history paired with willingness to push him into new emotional territory. Themes: justice, corruption, and moral responsibility. Thematically, Last Resort delves into the corrosion of power structures and the cost of silence in the face of injustice. The novel critiques how wealth and influence can insulate criminals from accountability. Theme that feels especially resonant in today's social climate. Joe's pursuit of justice isn't merely legal. It's moral, personal, and at times existential. One of the most powerful aspects of the novel is its exploration of moral fatigue. What happens to a man who has spent his life fighting, often alone, against systems designed to protect the powerful? Joe's weariness isn't portrayed as weakness, but is the cumulative weight of years spent battling for what's right. And yet, he fights on. That perseverance becomes central theme, the idea that justice is not destination but commitment, even in the face of personal loss. The setting, seemingly idyllic rural resort, is brilliant metaphor for surface appearances hiding rot beneath. It reinforces the novel's recurring message: evil doesn't always wear a villain's mask. It often smiles politely, dresses well, and wields influence. Writing style and voice. The prose in Last Resort is confident, clean, and character-driven. J.D. Pratt's writing honors his father's legacy while bringing his own precision and narrative rhythm to the page. The dialogue feels authentic, often imbued with Southern flavor, but never veering into cliché. Descriptions are vivid without being overwrought, and action scenes are tautly rendered. There's an understated lyricism to certain passages, especially those involving Joe's inner monologues or his reflections on Caroline. These quieter moments give the reader a chance to breathe, reflect, and connect with the emotional stakes beyond the investigative plot. Most importantly, the narrative voice remains distinctly Dillard's. World-weary but sharp, principled but human, it's remarkable feat, considering the change in authorship and testament to the writer's deep understanding of the character. Series continuity and accessibility for longtime fans. Last Resort is a gift, chance to revisit beloved character in new but familiar context. There are subtle callbacks to earlier books, references that will resonate deeply with those who've been with Joe from the start. However, the novel is also highly accessible to new readers. The backstory is woven in naturally with enough exposition to understand Joe's history without bogging down the narrative. Readers who have followed the entire series will find added depth in the way Joe's arc is progressing. There's sense of maturity in this installment, slow march toward legacy and closure, though not finality. It feels like the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of an old one. Strengths, character depth. Joe Dillard remains a deeply relatable and admirable protagonist. His emotional complexity is handled with grace, and supporting characters are similarly well developed. Thematic weight. The novel tackles heavy subjects: corruption, justice, aging, mortality, without becoming didactic. Themes emerge organically from the story, enhancing rather than distracting from the plot. Pacing and suspense, masterclass in balance. The narrative keeps hooked without relying on cheap thrills or overblown set pieces. Authenticity of setting. The rural Tennessee landscape, Both beautiful and isolating, becomes character in itself. It's rendered with such specificity that the reader is drawn fully into its haunting atmosphere. Smooth authorship transition. J.D. Pratt handles the continuation with remarkable poise. The novel reads as seamless extension of Scott Pratt's world, but with enough individuality to hint at where the series could go next. Areas for growth. While Last Resort is largely successful, few elements could have benefited from additional development. The antagonist's backstory. The primary villain is effective in terms of plot function, but their personal motivations and history could have been explored further to enhance psychological depth. Supporting cast expansion. Certain secondary characters, such as local law enforcement or resort staff, felt underutilized. Deeper dive into their and loyalties might have added another layer of tension and intrigue. Closure for subplots. Couple of threads introduced mid-novel, particularly regarding the journalist's personal risk, are left somewhat unresolved. Though they don't hinder the main story, more closure would have been satisfying. Conclusion. Last Resort is a triumphant continuation of the Joe Dillard series. Gripping, emotional, and resonant. It offers both satisfying mystery and rich character study, delivered with the intelligence and heart that have always defined the series. J.D. Pratt proves himself worthy steward of his father's legacy, breathing new life into beloved character while preserving the tone and integrity that fans cherish. This novel is more than a return. It's of why Joe Dillard continues to matter in worlds still grappling with injustice. For readers who crave thoughtful thrillers with moral weight, Last Resort is not to be missed. Rating 4.7 out of 5 stars.